Hello and welcome to another video. Today we are going to look at so-called Hadith science and see how well it stacks up. Spoiler alert: it doesn't. Anyway, I want to share this short video from a prominent YouTubing Sunni, Sheikh Uthman, who is making the case for the robustness of Hadith verification. And in doing so, he outlines 5 criteria that he says are essential for verifying a Hadith as sahih. So let's have a listen.
But one thing I'll just explain, for a hadith to be considered sahih, which is authentic, there are 5 conditions. Okay? So for a hadith to be considered sahih, it has to meet at minimum 5 conditions. Okay? One of them, the chain has to be connected. Right? It's called ittisal sanad. So that means from the Prophet ﷺ till when it's written, there can be no breaks in the chain.
First criteria: there cannot be any breaks in the chain. This principle that a hadith must have an unbroken chain of transmission, or isnad, is probably the most commonly cited criterion for an authentic, or sahih hadith. However, it's actually 100% untrue. There is a class of hadith where there is an undeniable break in the chain that hadith scholars themselves universally agree can be considered sahih. These hadiths are where there is a break in the chain between the companions of the Prophet, or sahaba, and the Prophet himself. What this means is that one sahaba can legitimately narrate a hadith that he could not possibly have heard himself from the Prophet, for example, if he was too young at the time of the narration. And furthermore, that sahaba is not required to cite from where, or from who he heard the narration. Hence there is a clear break in the chain from between the Prophet and the first Sahaba who narrated. Here is a popular mainstream Sunni site, Islam Web, explaining the legitimacy of such broken-chained hadiths.
Mursal As-Sahaabi is when the companion reports something that the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, did or the like of that, but it is known that he did not witness it because he was young at the time or had not yet embraced Islam. The Hadith scholars, who set the criteria for authenticity, agreed that Mursal As-Sahaabi Hadith, that is, hadiths that have a broken chain between a Sahaba and the Prophet, are accepted and authoritative. And this is because most of the narrations cited therein are reported on the authority of companions, and all of them are trustworthy and reliable reporters.
And here's popular American mainstream Sunni commentator Yasir Qadhi.
Being a Sahabi does not have to have a chain to the Prophet ﷺ. Even if you heard something from other Sahaba, it is a Hadith. This is a principle of Hadith, by the way. A Sahabi doesn't have to hear directly from the Prophet ﷺ. A Sahabi can hear from other Sahaba, and all of the Sahaba are trustworthy. We don't need an isnad within the Sahaba.
Note, we don't need an isnad from within the Sahaba. Or in other words, breaks in the chain can absolutely occur between the Prophet and the Sahabi. And this does not affect the authenticity of the hadith. They absolutely can, and have, in many cases, including in Bukhari, be considered sahih. So sorry Sheikh Uthman, you are completely wrong to cite this as a criterion for sahih hadiths.
Then, each narrator has to have solid or good memory. So this is something that makes hadith sciences unique, because in history we don't check that. Like when we talk about Alexander or Julius Caesar, even if we look at the first-hand reporters, we don't check their memory. Then you have to have good moral character. So again, Western historians, even if you look in the scientific industry, when we do a clinical trial, the people that are involved, we don't check their moral character. We don't care if they're drunks or liars or gamblers. We don't check if they lie regularly. But in hadith we check. Anybody that was even accused of lying, that would be a fabricated hadith. Even accusation, would not make it matruk.
So we'll just ignore the bleedingly obvious issues around a system where simply accusing someone of lying renders them a fabricator. And we'll go straight to the fact that putting judging good memory and judging good moral character in the same sentence as a science and even describing it as very accurate is of course something totally legitimate. By which I mean completely laughable. Obviously, things like judging good moral character and even judging someone's memory is going to be entirely based on your own personal moral viewpoints. It is purely subjective. In fact, it's difficult to think of anything less scientific or accurate than judging a person's character. Where does one start in trying to accurately and objectively judge someone's moral character? No doubt these traditionalists will say that it's based on their Islamic credentials, whether or not they are sincere Muslims. So I ask, what is a sincere or genuine Muslim? Is it the Sunni brand? Is it the Shia brand? Is it the Salafists? Is it the Wahhabi brand? Etc., etc. Clearly, rather than being an exact and objective process, it is in fact entirely subjective and therefore completely worthless. Just take the example of Bukhari, who, remember, is held up as the most thorough and scientific, and even most objective, of all the Hadith scholars. From Bukhari's writings, we know of only two criteria that he used to judge Hadith narrators as reliable. The first was that his narrators had to be from the people of Hadiths, meaning that his narrators must be knowledgeable and have an interest in Hadiths. And the second was that his narrators had to have said, faith is speech and action. Now it's very important to note that this phrase, faith is speech and action, was a very particular sectarian phrase used in Bukhari's time, and it was used specifically as a refutation of one particular group of Muslims called the Murji'ah. These were a group of Muslims who held the belief that no one, as in no human, has the right to judge whether someone is a Muslim or not, based on his or her observed actions and behavior. That only God knows truly what is in someone's heart, and therefore, only God knows whether they are a genuine Muslim or not. And so this phrase, faith is speech and action, directly rejects this idea and promotes a very particular sectarian position within Islam. And if you think, like any reasonable person would, that this Murji'ah belief that no one has the right to judge whether or not someone is a good Muslim, based on their outward actions and behavior alone, is a perfectly sensible and moral stance to take, then consider this. Bukhari, this supposedly great and objective judge of character, not only rejected this view, but actually believed that hadiths that are narrated by people who espouse this view can be rejected as inauthentic purely on the grounds of the narrator's personal beliefs, and not because of any objective or scientific analysis of the narrator's actual reliability as a historical source. Oh yes, that's right, Bukhari, this supposedly great analyst who allegedly employed the most foolproof, accurate, scientific method to compile the most objectively authentic collection of hadiths, was in fact 100% reliant on his own petty sectarian biases in determining which hadiths were authentic. And still he claims, with a straight face, that this is also very scientific and accurate. Hilarious.
Chain is connected, good memory, good moral character, then we have to make sure there's no contradictions. If there is something stronger that contradicts it, it's called shadh. Then we don't accept it as sahih. So if there is a hadith that mentions something, or an ayah in the Quran, and then a hadith comes something contradictory to it, it could never be sahih.
Fourth condition. There cannot be any contradictions either between hadiths and the Quran, or between two hadiths. Again, 100% wrong. I'm not even going to go into the mountains of contradictions between hadith and the Quran. It is enough to just touch on the contradictions between hadiths to prove the Shaykh wrong. And I'm not even talking about weak versus sahih hadiths. There are a plethora of so-called sahih hadith that directly contradict other sahih hadiths. Let's just go through a few of them. Here's Sahih Bukhari saying, in one hadith, that the Prophet always performed a 2-rakat prayer after the Isha prayer. And here's another Sahih Bukhari hadith saying, that the Prophet strictly forbade such a prayer. And here's Sahih Bukhari saying, that the last verse of the Quran revealed to the Prophet was the verse dealing with usury. But then Sahih Bukhari also says in another hadith that the last verse revealed was about asking for a legal verdict about heirs. Then we have Sahih Muslim clearly quoting the Prophet as saying there is no evil omen. Whereas Sahih Bukhari quotes the Prophet as saying that evil omens may be found in women, the house and the horse. Then we have a report from the Prophet that the Dajjal, the Antichrist-type figure that will supposedly appear during the end of days, is blind in his right eye, contradicting another report from the Prophet that he is blind in the left eye. Both these reports from Sahih Muslim. That's just a taste of the contradictions that exist between hadiths. There are many more. Far too many to cover in one short video. So, again, to claim that authentic or Sahih hadiths don't contradict one another is just another joke.
On top of that, there can be no textual defects. Meaning that if there is a grammatical error, if there is a word that's been flipped, that could never be Sahih.
Fifth condition, the words of an authentic hadith cannot be changed in any way. The Sheikh is now trying his hand at stand-up comedy. Because what he claims here, that hadiths cannot even have one word flipped to be considered authentic, is just so unbelievably wrong that it must be intended as a joke. Let's be clear, hadiths are literally paraphrastic by nature. It is common knowledge amongst hadith scholars themselves that a very large number of the hadith corpus is made up of hadiths that are paraphrased to some degree. Just look at one random mainstream traditionalist scholar quoted on the site seekersguidance.org who says some hadiths are clearly narrated verbatim. And then goes on to say that, however, a lot of the time we see that the narrators paraphrase. In the majority of cases, this does not pose any problems, he says. Just to demonstrate, I'll just pick one random example in Sunnah.com, where we have here in Sahih Muslim, two different versions of the same hadith, where the Prophet's wife Aisha is reporting what the Prophet prescribed for prayer for those who were traveling. And we can clearly see here in the Arabic texts, some words have been changed around, some slight changes in phrasing, and a few grammatical variations. However, the meaning of the two remains the same. And both retain their Sahih status. And this happens literally all the time. And it's not hard to find. In Sunnah.com you can identify them whenever there is multiple versions of the same hadith, e.g. Hadith 685a, 685b, and 685c. All three from the same narration, but each through different chains and each with clearly different wording. And no hadith scholar will ever say, oh, only one of these different versions can be considered authentic or sahih because the rest have changed the words around. No, hadith scholars universally accept that all versions are authentic. Because they all agree that hadiths, both sahih and weak, are paraphrastic by nature. It's literally a defining characteristic of hadiths. How on earth did this so-called sheikh miss this memo? So to claim that hadiths that have their words changed by narrators cannot be considered sahih is simply wrong. Laughably wrong. So there we have it. Just a short demonstration of how muddled, confused, and frankly, dead wrong these so-called hadith scholars like Sheikh Uthman are. Every single one of his 5 criteria is either seriously flawed or just plain wrong. And this is hadith science in a nutshell. Seriously flawed and just plain wrong. So that's all for today. Thanks for watching and don't forget to like and subscribe.